to that thing we call a calendar. And guess what? I know this is the show you were looking for because you found it. Most likely, if you're hearing us live, we're at Ochelli.com. We could be in a couple other places, but do appreciate you. Even if you're catching us further on down the stream, you're via your Fondle Slab of choice, your application that is applicable. And, hey, whatever, the podcatcher du jour. We're out in most places where podcasts are, and extremely happy to have you along. But it is Thursday as I speak, and that is the day of the week just before Friar's Day. So here we go. This is a little different. I have the occasional visit from my friend. There we go. I'm tripping over my tongue already. Visit from my friend Shali. And, he was on a Friday night show not too long ago where he called in really, really quickly, kind of like a drive-by sort of commentary. And appreciate it, certainly do. But we have had a couple of shows with Greg Canonis, and I'm probably mispronouncing your name. But, Greg, you guys are doing this podcast, which people can still get on Anchor.com, I believe. And I'm going to let Shali tell you the proper link because I was juggling crap before I went live, and I don't have it in front of me now. So there it is. Shali, first of all, man, how you doing? Can you give us the proper link and reintroduce Greg because, it's been a couple of months, I think, since we spoke to him.
All right, so when this whole thing got started, we moved into overdrive with a lot of the podcasts talking about, even in January we started talking about the possibility of lockdowns and the things that were going on over in China. And we did those podcasts, and you can see them on Google and Apple. And in case you missed the BS, that is the name of the podcast. In case you missed the BS, again, Google, Apple, Spotify, Anchor, and Greg is an entrepreneur and a man who knows about money and the flow of money and the corruption of money and all these other different things and oil and all these other things. So I'm just going to turn it over to Greg to introduce himself and start it going.
Right. Really quickly, if you guys go back in the archive at Ochelli.com, if you do that, I appreciate you. But also, you can hear a whole background on Greg and get an idea that the man understands economics. Certainly, we had a back and forth about oil. We talked about the current economic conditions pre-coronavirus time. Although maybe it wasn't pre-coronavirus time. It was happening, but it wasn't really the thing that was keeping the MSM going. CNN, a lot of people want to say it's the CIA network or it's the Clinton News Network. Got to tell you, I argue it is the coronavirus news network at this point. That's all they do. And a lot of the MSM is absolutely obsessed, focused on pushing an agenda related to the virus now. But really our first conversation with the two of you on this show and what you guys were doing ahead of all this madness, honestly, was laying out a roadmap for exactly where this could all go. And, Shali has been a great facilitator, but, the brain behind the meat of the knowledge was actually Greg. And, Greg, happy to have you back, man. So go right ahead and let us know where you're at. And do you think that was a fair summation of where you've been with this so far with Shali anyway?
Oh, it was very fair. We if you recall, our first discussions right when this was getting going back in, was it in March when we did our first our podcast?
I want to say
when they were just starting the lockdown.
Yeah, March 23rd, yeah. And then
it was right after Bush. Excuse me. Yeah.
Bush.
Trump declared the national emergency,
right?
And we were in that first 2-week process, and that's right at the time when Putin said that he announced that he was going to continue production of oil. He was given the quid quo pro that he was looking for, probably having to do now, understanding after looking at it a little bit more. We had hoped that maybe he was doing it to sort of get back at there's a lot of payback that the Russian people are owed as a result of the Bolshevik Revolution. So hopes were
there's that, and I think
doing something for that.
Right. I think you and I might have spoken around the time that the oil price actually went into a negative number, which then we saw the sort of payback the reduction in the production from the American oil producers, all of a sudden giving back the balance of power to, well, OPEC Plus, basically, which does include the Russian Federation as far as the oil market goes, right?
Right. Well, what happens when you shut down an economy, a global economy like they've done, the oil isn't going to go anywhere. And the tanks, oil price is based upon how the oil supply that's currently in the tank farm systems, like Cushing, Oklahoma, is the main one, Houston, and there's a number of them around the country, but the three big ones, my understanding, are Cushing, Houston, and New York, which is actually New Jersey, are the three biggest tank farm reserves. Those tanks have to maintain a certain level. If they get too high, like if the level of those tanks goes above, say, 40%, they know they got a problem. That means the spigot down the line isn't moving fast enough that they got to cut production. Otherwise, those tanks can fill up, and that's not good. So that's where we get the drops in the prices. So, but anyway, tonight's show is not about the oil industry, though it's fascinating. It does, in a way, it does relate to it, because everything has to do with energy. It's the number one thing. Where we are now is we are moving to a different phase of this, and fortunately, people are starting to come together and starting to look into the legal aspects of this shutdown, and there's been some great work. I'm actively involved in that with my business. And we have some good news for people. There's a possibility that the end of this could be coming within the next few months. We'll have to see. It depends how the courts act. But the process of suing governors, state officials, are just beginning. Some of your listeners may have heard that restaurants in New York have banded together to sue both Andrew Cuomo and de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, for $2 billion. For the draconian shutdown measures and everything, closing their restaurants. They can't have in-house dining. The rest of New York State can have it, but not New York City, not all over New York. So that's a very important case. Another important case was in the state of Ohio, where an attorney by the name of Tom Rentz filed on behalf of a plaintiff group a case against Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio. And it passed the first hurdle, which means now that the case can the discovery process can begin, and then eventually the case will be heard and adjudicated. Now, this is very exciting for all of us, because what's happening is all of this COVID-19 scare is purely based on data fraud. And if you're not aware, data fraud is an actual law that was put on the books, I think in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, primarily used by the Securities and Exchange Commission to go after people committing stock fraud. Because if you think about it, the buying and selling of stock is all based on data. So if a company falsifies data to sell a stock for illicit gain, the penalty of data fraud carries up to a 30-year prison sentence.
Right, and there are a variety of statutes all over the country that relate to what people generally refer to as false advertising, where you have public proclamations that mislead people into believing that there is a value or a problem with something. See, that's why you can't just plant like false news stories, say, against an opponent company or something like that to try and drive down the value and their market share. There's all sorts of protections like that. Now, this, however, would be different because it would set a precedent if this case were adjudicated and it was found that basically public officials had misled the public and it caused a cascading effect across a lot of different industries. that would be, kind of precedent setting. Now, it's not unprecedented that public officials have been taken to court before for intentionally hindering people's ability to do business. That's happened many times, many different ways. But because of the sort of wide range of industries and individuals that are affected here, this would definitely set a unique precedent if it were found that the public officials had acted in bad faith, so to speak, by misrepresenting the data points that they were utilizing to set policy, public policy, which did indeed negatively impact many industries, businesses, livelihoods all across the board, right?
All around the world. Doing
yeah.
it in every nation.
But since we're dealing with
American
that's
exactly
courts,
the case. But
right,
but
but
nobody denies that the government should step in a genuine national health emergency where people actually are, succumbing, dying. There's a genuine health emergency. Absolutely, nobody would raise a finger or raise any doubts about what the efforts of the government to try and save people. But we all know that's not happening here.
Right, like say confining people to their houses because there is a toxic air which is in an area. People are not going to sue you, confine me to my house because there was, stuff in the air that was going to burn holes in my lungs if I was breathing it outside. If there was curfews and lockdowns put in place for that purpose, you try and take that to court, they would say, well, obviously that's ridiculous because for the public good, this is what was happening. But in this
it would
case,
all be backed.
Mm-hmm.
It's all backed by genuine science that's efficacy cannot be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The example you give, there's a railway derailment, a chemical car explodes and it spews sulfur gas or cyanide type gas in the area, and they tell everybody to stay indoors and tape the windows and doors.
Mm-hmm.
All right, lock yourself in. Do not go outside. The animals the squirrels are falling from the power lines. Okay,
mm-hmm.
No one's going to turn around and sue the government. No one would the court wouldn't even entertain the case.
Right.
Now here we are, 6 months, 7 months into this so-called pandemic. And there have been numerous scientific studies. One in particular that is very important is the Stanford USC study that was, they actually completed two, one in April and one at the end of June. Okay. And they were the first ones to come out and say that the death rates, the mortality rates of COVID-19 were less than 1%. In fact, you have, I think it's a 99.46% chance of surviving COVID-19 if you contract it. Mm-hmm. And that only people with pre-existing conditions and pre-morbidities would be at the highest risk. But you certainly, with that type of number, the lockdown and the shutdown is unjustified. So for months, quality researchers, scientists, politicians, people that have rationality of thought could say, look, is this really the right thing for us to do? We're destroying the lives of tens of millions of people.
Right.
Half the population there's nobody in the United States, unless you're one of the oligarchs, who has not been affected by this. And so people have been sort of sitting and waiting, and they didn't hear from the medical community. What they heard was from the corporate hospital medical community that was reinforcing the COVID-19 meme that was being put out by
Johns Hopkins,
Bill Gates, and Johns Hopkins University, those places. Yeah. And because independent doctors were not joining together to stand up and say, wait a minute, this does not meet the criteria of medical science. Mm. All right, I had to write a thesis on medical science, on the efficacy of medical science before I could get into med school. So don't tell me these people are following the standard rules or and coming up with results in their studies that can't be questioned. So it took a little while with the courts being shut down And I think with the people being paid off through the PPP program, it took a little while, but here we are now. The next round of stimulus is needed, but that's now being held up in Congress. And literally millions of people are flapping in the breeze. They don't know. They don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months.
People about to be homeless. People about to be kicked out of their apartments and their domiciles.
What they do know is that their opinion about COVID-19 was derived from three things: propaganda, emotionalism, and fear. Rationality did not enter into the equation. They did not come to their opinion through rationality. Because no one has ever showed them any ethical evidence that the virus even exists.
Well, here is a curious thing, right? I am somebody who is a self-taught researcher. I've done lots of data research for various reasons, okay? And I'll tell you what I've discovered throughout this entire time period, and that is that there is no consistency here. Even among the propagandists, they have no consistent data. It appears to me as though it seems like no one who is publishing any of the data showing all of these different figures about mortality rates, about the different levels of communicable states, exactly which portion of which population is being affected. It seems to me, Greg, nobody has these numbers straight. Nobody, which is really odd, because generally speaking, when you have a concerted propaganda program which is demonstrable like this right now, as I said, CNN is like the coronavirus news network, but tell me there is not a concerted effort in all sorts of media at this point to push this idea that, if you're not wearing a mask, you're absolutely a horrible human being. If you don't get the vaccine, which we don't have yet, but once it comes, you're going to have to take this because otherwise you are destroying your neighbors. There is already this kind of shaming that is going on over data that has not been, collated, first of all, because there is not a consistent pattern here. There is not a consistency in the numerical data at all. Number one. Number two, there are controversies in the scientific ideas. Okay, here it is. This is the virus. This is the way it works. They're constantly coming up with, well, actually, we've discovered this now, and actually, we've discovered that now. And this isn't just what's, being broadcast in the media, but it seems like most of academia is also in the midst of not having a consistent story emerging. See, one of the most interesting scientific principles here when you're talking about collection of data through research, actually, observational science, is that generally speaking, you begin to find a pattern which can be reproduced, okay? And it should be maybe not directly exactly perfect, but let's just say you're testing a population, and your theoretical concept is that, we'll go with one of the most common ones that's being discussed, right? That older people are certainly more affected by this than younger people. And here's why. We can see that here's your infections. Here's a greater number of, more difficult ends for this one way or another, either a chronic illness or death among the older population, and you see it descend as the age goes down, right? But none of those sorts of sets of data are consistent with one another. You would think that if you're working in Texas, let's say, at a university, and you're collecting this data, that, it's going to look sort of similar to what they're collecting in Connecticut. Now, obviously, there might be slight variations if you're collecting this on a local level, but these people seem to be collecting from the same pool of information and still coming up with different numbers. It's all in controversy. There's nothing remotely consistent, it seems to me, within the medical community, whether you're talking about the corporate-backed people like Fauci, who, come on, the guy is somebody who works for the vaccine industry. I'll put aside my prejudices about that for a second, but you can't find consistency with him, with the the Surgeon General. You can't find it among the supposed epidemiologists who seem to be experts on infectious disease all over the place. They all seem to be talking about something entirely different. None of it seems to be coming together consistently. And
You're correct.
that's something that I've seen all the way through this process, where in the early days you could say, look, it's emergent. Circumstances are changing as the situation is evolving. But 6 months later, I still do not see anything consistent, except everybody now agrees we have over 200,000 dead that is related to this, despite the fact that the different testing that would have been implemented throughout the collection of that 200,000 has changed. Nobody makes any sort of discernment about that. I mean, supposedly we had very bad tests to begin with. Now we supposedly have different ones. You have your spit test, which takes 15 minutes to do. That's a slightly different process. Nobody's accounting for maybe there was a problem, although there is admittedly in some testing an 80% accuracy, which, by the way, means 20% wrong.
Well, I mean, the
so
time
1 in 5. I'm just saying there's so much inconsistency here.
Right. The time in the beginning that they said, hey, how long will it take to process after one has a test? I don't think there was any clear-cut time that it would take. Apparently, Trump had his, and then it was like, 15 minutes later, it was like, oh yeah, you don't have it. It just like you're saying, across the board, every aspect, every facet of this deception was meant to, like all these different stories, nobody knew what to make of it. And that's what I hear. Like even people that are buying into this, people that I work with, people that I communicate with on a daily basis from time to time are like, they're even saying, it doesn't make sense. This, that, and the other thing, but oh, you got to be careful. So, they see that it doesn't make sense, but they don't talk about it too much. And then they just adhere to the rules and the authoritarian protocols that have been put together by our, Tony.
Because nobody of reason, okay, in their mind, nobody of reason is standing up and asking the questions. The medical community as a whole has been fairly silent up to this point. There are a few doctors, a couple of thousand in a country of 10 million doctors. There's a few thousand that are raising their voices. And right. Where has the legal establishment been in all this? Where are the lawyers? How come the lawsuits haven't been filed? How come the lawyers weren't demanding the efficacy of genuine science being presented before, and even threatening, not just the political leaders, but the corporates and all the rest of them that have benefited from this?
Shaming, I guess you could say, they were afraid. I mean, there are people too that are elevated in the art of legalese, but at the same time, there are people too. So they're like sitting back, waiting, thinking that they could die and their family could die. So that came into play as well.
There was a point there they didn't know, and they had to kind of like wait it out. And then by the time we got into July, the courts started to open up, and that's when the initial filings, which weren't reported in the mainstream media, but filings started to begin and are beginning in earnest now. And the lawyer I'm working with, Tom Rentz, he told me that he can identify at least 100 different lawsuits that can be filed, class action lawsuits that could be filed against corporations and political leaders of all type on the local, state, and federal level. That these lawsuits are going to go on for the next couple of decades.
Well, see, I believe it. No, and here's the problem with it, right? Is that it's not okay. I'm going to say this. I don't know if you're gonna not be happy with it, but it's not a phantom. Okay. In other words, this isn't just the figment of somebody's imagination. That there is indeed a disease that appears to be like a really extra nasty flu. Now, I have not been able to secure a test. You ought to see the testing situation in Georgia. Even though they, made a big deal about creating a testing center just outside of Atlanta and all this other stuff, telling you right now, even though we're the home of the CDC over here, testing is very difficult to come by. Although if you end up in a hospital, boy, do they want to test you. And it does take like 2 weeks to get the results back as of very recently. But anyway, that all aside, I have been ill. I'm not sure if I might have gotten the thing, to be honest with you, because I've had this continuous, like, recurring, like, mini flu that keeps hitting me after I was pretty profoundly sick. And I don't know if that's the real thing. I don't know if that's, COVID-19 or it's something else. I'm not sure. But I do know that people are getting sick. So it's not as though this is just, they told you about it and there's nothing to it at all. However, if they can't...
Can I give you an analogy I think that might fit? That might
Sure.
make a ha-ha analogy?
Sure.
Let's suppose you woke up tomorrow and you had a toothache.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't do anything about it for a couple of days, and the pain didn't go away. You put Ambisol on it, whatever. Finally, you were just like, look, this is annoying me. I'm going to go to the dentist.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the dentist, he takes x-rays, and he says, Mr. Ochelli, I'm sorry, we're going to have to do a root canal on this. All right?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty serious. It's beyond, you've got an infection in there. If you don't take care of this, here's the possibility. Anybody who knows anything about endodontal disease, an infection in your tooth can lead to an abscess. An abscess can kill you.
Yeah.
And poison your blood, get into your brain. In fact, you have just under a 1% chance of dying from a toothache.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Now, let's suppose the doctor tells you, the dentist tells you, okay, we'll make an appointment for next week. Here's some medication to help you with the pain. We'll see you next Thursday. On your way home from the dentist, a car on the other side of the highway jumps the rail, hits you with a head-on collision, and you die. And the coroner, or the hospital puts on your death certificate that you died of a toothache. Now, did you die of a toothache, from a toothache, or did you die with a toothache?
Interesting you use that analogy because I've had abscesses several times and been through the conversation of you better remove that because this infection can spread. But yeah.
So you see what I'm saying? The allegory here, and even the
Absolutely.
CDC had to admit this when they revised their numbers at the end of August, was because while they were saying that at that time 170,000 deaths from the people from COVID, they had to clear the air because now their reputation's on the chopping block. They know the lawsuits are coming. So they're like, no, we have to clear this up. So they said only 6% died from COVID, 94% from other comorbidities. So just because a person dies with COVID, we're counting that as a COVID death? That's not science. That's politics.
No, right. And if they had said that, person dies of, okay, here's a very common thing that happens a lot, a heart attack. You'll find, cardiac arrest is a common cause of death on a death certificate. When you've examined as many death certificates as I have, you'll find that it seems like the majority of them contain that phrase if someone doesn't die from violence or something quite obvious, right? Their entire body riddled with cancer. Well, cancer is the cause of death. But in cases where you don't have, anything other than, they just expired. In a lot of cases, it says cardiac arrest. Now, sometimes they add something like due to diabetic complications. And it's possible that, obviously, a disease that is described even remotely like this could add complications to a circumstance and not necessarily be the cause of death, but it didn't help any. You know what I mean? It was complications were also here and made it impossible for us to recover this person because this was going on too. That's another possibility. And, one could say in the initial stages of this, collecting those numbers might have been difficult because, again, you're relying on, in a lot of cases, the local medical examiners or coroners who, by the way, are not always even doctors across the country. There's a very inconsistent standard for those that are signing these death certificates. Again, if you're under the care of a doctor who is caring for you might be able to sign your death certificate. But if you are somebody who dies at home, which a lot of people do, guess what? You're faced with this medical examiner who, quite frankly, the horrific rulings, some places have great people who understand what it is they're looking at when they do a medical forensic examination. But it is inconsistent across the board, and therefore there has to be an allowance here for an emergent situation where people did not know what was going on and might have been attributing deaths to COVID when it wasn't exactly that was the cause of death. And on the opposite side of this, you might have also had people missing them. So you got to admit that those numbers, and I don't see anybody willing to admit this anywhere, by the way, that those initial numbers are flawed on the face of it because of the emergent situation. That's almost a guarantee. So when I see
Correct.
the death toll, and I don't understand why no one in the medical industry has come forward, not your independent doctors, not the people, the Fauci's, the CDC, Redfield, whoever, I don't care. None of them have come forward and said, look, there are probably some problems with the initial data here. And in fact, it would be excusable if there were problems with the initial data because of the emergent situation. I hate to make it sound like that because it sounds awfully cruel, I bet. But that's
you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And that's perfectly reasonable in the period from March through the end of April.
Correct.
Let's even say the first 90 days of the emergency.
Right.
Right?
So,
at the end of that 90 days, you already had USC and Stanford doing actual studies and tests with people who were tested positive, and they were looking at they were analyzing, looking for the virus, couldn't find the virus. All right, and they had determined, and they had done their blind studies. They test 1,000 people, then they correspond that with another 1,000 people, and do that with a third group of 1,000 people, and test everybody and see what commonality, if there's a common contagion that they're all suffering from. Right? What they determined was they couldn't identify anything. So what they said was, look, there's something out there. We all know that it is. But here's from their test, 99% of the people that tested positive recovered.
Mm-hmm.
Not much different from the common flu or the common cold. So the reason for the lockdowns, at that point, the lockdowns should have been immediately shut down. Trump should have declared the national emergency over. And with the declaration of the national emergency over, he could have shut down all the governors from doing the, persistent lockdowns through the summer, shutting down the economy, social distancing. It could have been, look, he could have said, we're going to stop the national emergency, but at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to continue testing. We're going to list more labs. Okay, we're going to ask more universities to do similar studies as USC and Stanford, and we're going to come to the bottom of this. But in the meantime, we're not going to destroy our economy or allow the economy of the entire world to be taken under and for a so-called invisible enemy. We don't even know what it is. It's ridiculous. And we're destroying people's lives. And if we don't have the science, if we don't have the efficacy to say this is it, this is indisputable, because we are putting all these people's lives at risk, right? We are economically destroying the lives of tens of millions of people. We're personally liable if we're wrong.
True.
And we're not willing to take on that liability. What they did is they said, to hell with them. We're going to control this situation. We're going to crush anybody through shaming and other tactics. We're going to use all these psychological operation techniques that they've been using for so many different, it's just the same playbook being played out on us over and over again.
Same thing.
Yeah. It's going to, in the end, probably wind up being a nothing burger. Yeah. But if we destroy it and get a reset and everything in the meantime, we could get away with stealing the $50 trillion.
Exactly. I mean, this was just so that they could, I guess you could hope at this point, there's a lot of really horrible things that people are saying, like the direction that we're going. But if they can use this as a cover up for their financial crimes, like when those towers went down, all the crimes and all the financial transfers and all of this shit that went on just prior to, like, in the 8 o'clock hour on 9/11, these are financial crimes, and this will allow them to cover it up. And if they came to Trump and they said, listen, 2, 3, 4 months from now, you're the president in your second term, the economy is going to crash because we haven't done anything to stop the corruption. So What do you think he's going to choose? He's going to say, well, what can we do? Well, we can fucking put this, this bug out and say that it's a pandemic, and then, we can have that as an excuse. I think that's one leg of it.
Well, we know this was planned years in advance.
Sure.
All right, specifically for this. They knew that they were going to pull the plug in an attempt to steal all the money from the pensions and the 401ks. They had to do it because the baby boomers represented that treasure trove that they have been seething to get their hands on for the last 40 years.
Right, and I want you to go a little further with this. Shali, are you in my chat room at all?
I don't think so, but I can go there.
All right, go ahead and go into my chat room. Take a look at some of the questions that are being asked. I'd like it if you could help me out there, because I want Greg to start to move forward a little bit here, because there is a lot more to this. What we've established, though, Greg, as far as I'm concerned, is that there is a time period here where you could say that the lockdowns could have been done out of an abundance of caution because it was unknown what was happening. But by now, oddly, we do not still have a consistent handle on this, coming from, again, the medical establishment, academia, the AMA. Nobody has actually come out consistently and been able to explain, A, the virus, disease, whatever, B, exactly what the best way to really deal with it is. I know these general sort of discussions about social distancing and masks, I question, and I've questioned all this all along, only because, what the best way to really deal with it is. I know these.
Sorry, guys.
Sorry, go ahead.
Good. No, it was just I went to your page, and then the show started playing back. Go ahead.
Here popped up. Sorry.
Sorry about that, gentlemen.
But anyway, Greg, what I'm saying here is that there was all this inconsistency, but then there is the continued policy. And it was done inconsistently, by the way. You mentioned New York. That's one situation. But even if they start to allow the indoor dining, say at those restaurants and stuff like that, there's a whole other cascade effect here because, we're going to allow 25% occupancy. Now, given the premium of space in New York City, Greg, that is an untenable circumstance for the business model of most restaurants and bars. Okay, when you're talking about the city, for sure. You can't work on a 25% occupancy. These places are modeled for about 80% occupancy, and believe me, they try and overstuff it when they can to make up for nights when, they're only at 50. This 25% or these lowered amounts where you got to put, 6 feet, and, oh, by the way, buy all these plastic shields, and you're going to have to provide gloves to your wait staff, and yada, 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 whole lot of expense added to everybody's business model that is not there. You can't do it. You're not going to be able to absorb it and continue to do business. And that's not just in New York City. Again, in Georgia here, where they haven't been as extreme about the lockdowns, you still see it. There are businesses just going bust. They cannot maintain. Despite the fact that they're all on, DoorDash, Uber Eats, or whatever, these restaurants, without the in-person dining, without the ability to have more capacity or even have people stand online like they used to in their place to get even fast food, you're seeing places closing up, cutting staff, not being able to have the same operating hours, on and on and on. And we didn't even have the extreme lockdown that New York did. Mm-hmm. So, there is that which comes after they even release the lockdown in New York City. They're going to say limited capacity, like they tried in Florida. And a lot of businesses just said, well, no point in doing this either. And meanwhile, like you said, there's the financial aspect of this. So, this concept of recovery, given these parameters set for the sake of the virus, is another issue that comes after still. So, altogether, this is a big lot of trouble. And if this really is something where they don't have a reason to lock things down and to order all of these augmentations on businesses and everything else, then what would be the conclusion?
They are committing data fraud.
There you go.
Which is a felony, which carries up to a 30-year prison sentence. Knowingly shutting things down to the benefit of a few. All right? knowing that there's a great financial benefit in doing so for those few players, is a crime that is encompassing all of the political class, the financial class, and the corporate class that's out there today. So the battle is beginning. At least it's finally beginning, right? Where doctors, there are some, like, I'm personally bringing doctors. What I'm doing is, in my business, I work with private practitioners to help them survive this COVID-19, help them with patient payment platforms that don't crush their patients with predatory loans, helping them with reputation management, helping them to restructure their practices into private membership associations so they can't be shut down by the overreach of the government, and a whole host of other things that we do. So I reached out to Tom Rentz and said, look, we have to work together, because you can have a few business people form a class action lawsuit and go after the governor of Ohio. Mm-hmm. But people aren't going to pay attention to this until they see the doctors standing up. When 150,000 doctors join together in a class action lawsuit against all of these people, the political, financial, and corporate class, to the tune of thousands of class action lawsuits, the propaganda, the emotionalism, and the fear to which most people in this country have derived their opinion about COVID-19 from will melt away. Because now, finally, they'll get the facts. The facts have to be heard. The case has to be heard, and it has to be adjudicated.
How can we be sure that once that information...
The only way to circumvent let me finish. Okay. The only way to circumvent this system of corruption that's been put in place by every level of government, from the local to the state to the federal level, they're all reinforcing false data.
So
think of the reaction that the media had, back at the end of August when the CDC revised their numbers.
Okay.
They immediately said, if anybody talks about the CDC's revision, that's only 6% died from COVID-19, that they were promoting a conspiracy theory.
So how can we be sure? How can we be sure that when this discovery, hopefully this information, how is it going to, get through this lockdown in information that it's obviously been in place for like the 7 months now? How is this information that's going to come out of this discovery
going to get out for what we're doing right now? It's going to get out by people talking to each other on social media. It's getting out, and when people are wearing masks and people are believing in the COVID-19, it's just asking a few questions. So listen, it's just understanding you. I understand why you believe it, all right? But what if there was a group of doctors? What if scientists and doctors, okay, people that are paid to know this stuff, come out and challenge the evidence that you believe in? Would you still feel the same way?
Well, see, that's the interesting thing about the court case, because you make an assertion while Ohio is a little different than some other states, so I'm going to use some very general terms here. But filing the suit, you make an assertion that there has been false data utilized to back the actions that you're suing to put an injunction on, okay? This would be a basic way to go. In doing so, you'll now have to present data that contradicts their alleged data. So I'm wondering if you can, I don't know, maybe you can't tell us this, but do you know where the data is going to come from? Because obviously there's going to have to be data sets that are contradictory to what it is being released as the narrative here, to say, look, they're using false statements. The reason why we know that is because here is the real data. So I'm curious about the challenge of collecting the real data, because as I see across, again, like I said, across the spectrum in academia.
I'm glad you asked that, because Tom Rentz is working with a number of doctors and scientists that for now have to remain anonymous, right?
Fair enough.
Because the case is just getting going, and so it's very important that it remains anonymous. But when he's very confident with the expert that he has, that he can pose a significant challenge. And, once, for instance, numbers of, let's say the number of deaths, fatalities from this, is challenged properly in court, the number itself, the 200,000 plus that have died, would not even be admissible in court. It can very easily be overturned. Now, there's a lot of things to worry about this now that it's going to go to the court level. But now that it's in discovery, lawyers are filing lawsuits against Newsom in California, additional lawsuits against Cuomo in New York, against Greg Abbott in Texas, and this is going to happen all around the country in all 50 states.
Well, that's the importance of setting the precedent, you see, because even though it is in a different jurisdiction, if there's a successful suit here showing that, look, all of the data that they say they were using to make these policy decisions and, create these executive orders was unlawful because it was done under false pretense, which is one of those things in the law. Theft by deception and false pretense are key things. You have a falsehood presented, it's a lot of people might think of it as, the actions of a con artist, but this is how it works. Here's your false premise. You believe it, right? Well, now you have to do this because of false premise. If you can prove that was, A, a false premise, and B, they knowingly did that, then you have liability. And that could be the precedent set in Ohio could be cited in other places. So, I mean, this is the first of those lawsuits, and it would quite logically, if successful, lead to, again, just the birth of these lawsuits, which may indeed take quite a while to adjudicate. But again, if they're in all 50 states, no state was immune from being issued these policy decisions by the executives and the legislatures the possibilities become endless. You've got mayors, you've got governors, you've got state house people that were signing off on all kinds of stuff. I mean, some of them may have indeed done it unknowingly. But you got to find some liability in there somewhere, because you're going to tell me that you created an order which did so much damage. Well, gee, even if it was unknowingly, then you have
ignorance is no excuse in the eyes of the law. You know that,
right? That's right. What I'm saying. It just becomes a different charge.
When the USC Stanford report came out at the end of June, this whole thing should have been shut down in its tracks. Then it was not. It should have been shut down at the end of August. The only acknowledgement Trump gave to it was tweeting the CDC website, and then Twitter took the thing down. But all the people that support Trump said, "Oh my God, he tweeted about the CDC reports." But immediately, the vaccine warp speed program is still going full-fledged. He hasn't done anything to shut down the governors and the mayors or anything.
Nope.
He himself is personally liable. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about this, because this is a civil action, lawyers around the world are compiling the case and the data right now. There are thousands and thousands of doctors and scientists who are saying no. They have been, but they were shut down. They took the backseat approach for the first 90 days of this pandemic. It was like, if we're wrong, if we shout that this is a nothing burger and it turns out that tens of millions of people die, well, that's a risk. They'll wait and see. And of course, this didn't happen. And so now they're like, okay, we have to structure and organize with the court system, particularly in the United States. And the United States is amongst the only countries that has a civil litigation system. And as of right now, it's the last recourse we have, because many, many people, including doctors, have been communicating with the White House through social media. People that are high-ranking people that are connected all the way up to Trump have been pleading for them to stop this. This isn't making sense. Obviously, some things are adrift here. That this is not This is not the deadly pandemic we all thought, or we were all told there was going to be. So we need to stop this and clean this mess up and get back to business as soon as possible. Each and every time that has happened, what has been the reaction of Trump, from Trump all the way down? They double down. They go even harder.
Just keep doing it.
Well, here's the thing. I've got a question which actually I can mash together two questions I've gotten from Skype directly. I've got 3 Skype messages here, but two of the questions match perfectly, pretty much. And I'll rephrase this to you, Greg. They want to ask the following. Isn't there a bit of an urgency to this situation, considering that a national vaccination program could potentially be rolled out by November 3rd, given the statements of Trump? And fact is that once the vaccination program is rolled out, it would enjoy the protection of, going into the special vaccination court, and nobody would be able to touch that circumstance. And therefore, isn't there an urgency into getting some of this stuff accomplished in court quickly, so that possibly an injunction could be entered against it before it becomes policy? And again, pharmaceutical companies enjoy special protection for vaccinations. Okay, that's a combination of 2 questions, but they basically read the same way, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that before we run out of time this hour. Go ahead.
The answer is absolutely yes. Tom is working very quickly to get the depositions completed, the affidavit, so discovery process can be underway. And he's fully aware that they need to get this done, prior to Election Day. So this way, so that they can block this if necessary. And that could be one of the reasons why we're hearing about, this rapid speed thing to begin with. It isn't the health emergency itself. I mean, the numbers don't warrant them losing their cookies over anything at this point, and They know that.
Yep.
It's the legal ramifications that they're worried about right now.
Excellent. I've got one more question for you from the Skype, and then maybe I'll check in on the chat room unless Shali's got it over there, and maybe he could check for questions. But This one is let me get it back. Sorry, I clicked it out and got rid of it, Greg. I'm sorry about that. But let's see. Let's bring it back. Come on, you. Come back up. And look, I'll get to it in a second, but I think that the urgency here is something that needs to be understood, because a lot of things can continue to happen here. A lot more damage can be done if there is not some check on it. So I think that's absolutely necessary to consider here. Anyway, anything else you wanted to say about that while I try and pull this question back up?
Well, I did hear that Atlas, that Scott Atlas guy, said that the shot would not be mandatory. That's what he said. That was what was reported on the jab. As coming from Scott Atlas, that a lot of people praised that he was inserted into the action team, the Super Friends.
Right. Well, and there was a point that somebody tried to make, Rand Paul tried to make with Fauci, and it's funny that, I do think Rand Paul is incorrect regarding this concept of herd immunity, because herd immunity, you have to have a certain infection level, and we're certainly not there, and this links to the question that I had to pull back up. Now, basically the question runs like this. Let's assume that their death count is correct, and we have 200,000 dead. Based on the percentage of the population that represents, it still would not have justified the lockdowns, even if you accept their numbers. Has the guest considered that as in the course of their study on this?
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's more evidence of data fraud.
That's right. Well, what did Tom Renz say? Didn't he say that the numbers was like 30,000? That the actual real numbers?
He said one of his doctors,
right.
One of his experts that is going to be providing testimony has told him that the death numbers are probably no more than 25 to 30,000. It died from COVID. The real question is, there's one word here. There's a big difference between saying you died from something and
with it.
saying you died with something. That is a very, very important legal term. They consider if they're going to shut everything down because they say people can die because they have something, they die with something. Well, it could be COVID today. It could be a toothache tomorrow. It could be anything. And
well,
the system of law is put there in place so that, language is very important. These, they do not have the legal authority to shut a business down, to close churches, stop people from visiting relatives in the hospital or attending funerals or weddings.
They did it anyway.
Putting any limitations, stopping sporting events, you name it, based on a rumor.
Mm.
It has to be based on scientific evidence. It has to be based on the medical science model.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're committing data fraud.
Right, and a comment from the guy who asked about the 200,000 people and what that actually represents as a percentage of the population is a comment that I make offhand all the time, which is if you accept the data on the opioid crisis, we have an extremely larger number of people that are dead as a result of that. And we could talk about how, despite the fact that Purdue turned around and created Oxycontin that you couldn't snort or shoot anymore, it didn't really seem to get people off the opioids. And there's a whole industry there that pays fines just so that they can continue to push their junk into into the society. And they seem to be quite more efficient killers than the COVID, allegedly, if you take a look at it over time.
Sure.
So I think that's an interesting point, Greg, and we're almost out of time on this hour, so I'll let you sort of give the last thoughts, and then I think we'll take a break and I want to get more into the lawsuit if we can. Now, I realize some information will still not be ready to be shared just yet, but once it's an open court, it's a great thing, because that means that everybody has access to it. If you go out of your way to get it, I mean, we can definitely get court transcripts after the fact unless the whole files are sealed. So hopefully that's not done, regardless of the outcome of the case. I think it would be good to have it out in public view one way or another, Greg. But anyway, anything else you'd like to say before we close out this hour?
Well, this is really important because it's really our last straw before things go postal. Before people finally realize they have nothing left to lose and they're going to lose it. So hopefully these people wise up and look, this is not about destroying people, though I think that going after certain individuals and taking all of their money, even the money they hide in trust and foundations, which you can do in a civil litigation case, is important. All right. But this is just, they have to let off the gas pedal on this.
Yeah.
And I don't see do not see them stopping. They've been given every opportunity to back off from this, nicely. And I think everything would have, it probably would have been with very limited numbers of people saying, hey, we've got some civil litigation here, right? People would have been just been happy to get back to their lives and get back to work. But
maybe so, but you know what the interesting thing is here, Greg and Shali? I bet you guys will not argue with me about this. Here's the thing. This is not a left-right problem either, because both alleged sides of the aisle are participating in this one way or another.
That's true.
I don't think,
right.
Yeah.
You can't exonerate, say, but on the left, they actually, on the right, no.
This whole thing, they're trying to make, they're trying to make it look like the left against Trump. It's really the perfect disguise if they really are taking the whole thing down. It really is the perfect disguise.
Oh, yeah.
They're not hiding it. They're saying the Great Reset. The thing is, do we want their reset that they have planned for us? Absolutely not.
Nope.
Okay? What we need to do is we need to gain our moral authority again. And hopefully this has taught people, that's an important element of this. Because when you have your moral authority, you have the power and the ability to say no to these people. Draw the line in the sand and say no more.
we just ended for broadcast. You have the moral authority to say no to these people. That's where the hour ended.
Nice.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I was
Good
already
karma.
playing my outro music. You guys couldn't hear it, so I just
Good. Good.
cut there at a perfect stop. And I think that's great. So anybody got to use the bathroom or get a drink, I would suggest you do it. Because we can go a little deeper here if you guys are good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, there's a lot more to talk about.
Right.
You know?
I wanna not talk as much in this next hour and really just let you get to the meat of it. But I thought it was important to set a couple of things for context and to to go at this as a practical matter. It's not about the excitability or the politics of whose side are you on. This is a matter of if there is fraud in the data and they utilize this to bludgeon us with it and do this, then absolutely, I don't give a damn if they got a blue or red tie on. And if it does destroy people, that's their fault, not ours.
Well, it's a good addition. I mean, just the left and right being at the level of divide and conquer that we've never seen before. We've never seen this amount of polarization. I mean, you had the polarization when Bush was in there, but now, like if he came out and said, "I don't like Trump," the left would be like, "We love you, Bush. We love you." All you had to do was say something negative about him, and then you're on they're so desperate that you're on their side right away. But the thing is that they're so crazy with that Alyssa Milano. And then you've got the Hillary out there saying that Trump's not going to transfer the power. And I had to write today. I said, "You are a Baphomet creature from the depths. Please shut up and go away and never speak again or get on camera. You have served darkness well, and you are continuing to do so. You have always divided people and created death and destruction in your wake. The body of Christ compels you." It was an exorcism.
You know what? I would be more than happy to see her. I'd be more than happy to see Alyssa Milano and James Woods hold hands and have somebody douse them both in gasoline and be done with it.
You're hating yourself some James, huh?
Yeah, he's out of his freaking mind.
Well, I mean, he's like Alyssa Milano on the right. He's kind of like.
Well, that's why I said they need to hold hands with each other and just do a monk thing from the 60s and just here's your protest. There you go.
Mm-hmm. She made a video of her talking about Pennsylvania, like all my friends in Pennsylvania, and she's still quite attractive and rather busty at this point. But forget that. I mean, she is a crazy person. I just tease her. I send these United. I don't know if you ever saw those United Spot YouTube, the channel United Spot. It's very funny.
I don't think so, but go ahead.
They did a United Spot a cartoon of her calling for the police, and then Trump's son picks up and he goes, "Thank you for calling 911." And she's like, 9-1? What? He said, "We can't afford the extra one because you defunded us." It's so insane. It breaks up the nightmare that this is. It's very funny. It's tilted toward the right, of course, but of course. And then they have Pelosi in there, and she's like a squirt bottle, like everything that comes out of her dentures are like falling out of her mouth. So it is very funny. If you get a chance, the United Spot.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Tell you, no, that sounds good, but again, other side of the coin, it's just as crazy, man. It is just as insane. I mean,
done on purpose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I love how people like to point to violence and go to Chicago right away. I really love that, and you know why? Because that's how their bond issues function. Like. The money they're paying out for police brutality, it's like it's like a cash cow for the banks in the Chicago area.
It's all monetized.
It's all monetized. It's like, so at the end of the day, the police corruption, the fact that they're beating on people and everything else, it's an industry.
Well, we know.
It's what it is.
Well, we know what's going on with this. Could be the same thing. They could be monetizing it, saying, "Look, let the lawsuits come." All right. The politicians that lose all, they're stupid. These people don't These people are useful idiots. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
They're doing it because they're promised, like, oh, you go along with this little sham, and you'll be sitting pretty.
That's right. That's
right?
what Cuomo's doing it for.
You commit treason for this, and you'll get paid lovely to live in a nice house in a gated community, and we'll give you a job with a six-figure income, and you'll be set. But then when they realize, wait a minute, you don't think that de Blasio and Cuomo, who are facing a $2 billion lawsuit, aren't shitting a brick right now?
I don't know. Maybe Bloomberg can bail them out. Anyway.
You know what I'm saying?
So, no, I got you.
When they all go down like that, when they all start getting sued for billions of dollars, it takes away any benefit that they were promised. But do you think that the Rothschilds, who are behind all this, are going to make them whole? No. They're going to say, you fucked up. You trusted us. Sorry.
Your first mistake, you trusted me.
Exactly.
It's like
it's like
a dystopic, freaking futuristic movie. Anyways, you guys ready? We'll go back to live, and like I said, I'll just talk up the next hour and kind of hand it over to you, Shali, if you don't mind, and then you can kind of steer where else we need to go on this, because I'd like to hear more about the lawsuit for sure, and get out of the general discussion. So maybe you could do that.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, excellent. So that's what we're going to do. Hold on, and I will introduce second hour in about 25 seconds or so. Hold on. The second hour of the Ochelli Effect begins now, and I advise you to smoke them if you got them, and isn't that difficult when you got a mask on? Anyway, we are talking to Shali and the great Shali Lama, and of course Greg Canonis, who is a really a superior mind when it comes to financial things. But tonight we're talking about coronavirus and the lawsuit that appears to be getting a bit of traction in Ohio. It's been accepted, so discovery next, and then I am going to enjoy reading the transcripts of what happens. Of course, love to see what happens if people actually challenge the data that is allegedly driving policy, as we discussed in the first hour, and if you missed it, you're going to need to rewind and catch it, because a lot is in there. But meanwhile, I'd like to turn this back over to Shali, and once again, before we go any further, so we don't forget toward the end of the show, what is the name of the podcast? I know it's over at anchor.com, but it's also in a lot of other places where podcasts can be found, certainly, and do advise you go and listen to it, guys. It's been out there for a while, and if you go back in the old episodes, you'll find that it was ahead of the curve when it came to the corona panic. So, and that's what I keep calling it, the corona panic anyway. I know it's not very original, and I sound like Trump now. It's what I call it. But anyway, Shali, where do we go from here in the discussion? I kind of turn this hour over to you, my friend.
I mean, I have been watching this, this world from my own perspective. 2004, 2005, where, things kind of opened up in my mind to the possibilities. I always kind of felt that, the world didn't run and didn't, it didn't run the way that we were told. I've seen enough movies, I've seen enough, propaganda and things like that to know or just feel like something was not right. Like what I was seeing was not what actually is, and I didn't really get completely, political until, like the 2000 election with Bush and Gore, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I can't even begin to imagine how this guy Bush is the president or is going to be the president, So right away, because I didn't have a whole lot of money, I figured I must be a Democrat. So I started looking towards Gore, thinking that he was going to be like, this guy's, we got to get this guy in there because this guy over here, right? So I can see this manic thing going on with people, and I don't really think that it's as widespread as we're seeing, because I can tell you in my teens and in my 20s, I didn't give a crap about politics. I didn't give a crap about anything related to, any of the things that were going on in the real world. It was just like, here I am, I got to get a job, I got to do all this other stuff. I like money, somebody has it, I got to get it. So, I mean, I see this craziness that's going on, and I felt like kind of, a little bit manic and stuff back then when I was looking at Bush, and for some reason I didn't think that he deserved to be the president. Now I really don't believe anybody deserves to be the president. And so going forward, then Kerry comes in, and I'm like, I'm going to vote for Kerry. Kerry will Frankenstein will get this guy out of office. Fire bad Frankenstein, this Kerry guy. He's going to do the job. And then, of course, he loses. And that there was a point there when, after 9/11, where I looked at Bush and I said, well, I'm going to stop cutting on this guy because, the country's under attack and we got to bond together, man. We're all in this together. Remember that? We're all in this together, 9/11, And this whole thing now where everybody's saying, like, we're in this together. And I'm like, and I just want to yell to people like, hey, you know that thing about us all being in this together? I'm not in this with you. I'm not in this. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm hearing craziness and people that are just bowing down to authority. I know you kind of want to say these things because I'm not, we're not in this together with these other people. We have knowledge. We have the ability to critically think. Greg knows money. He understands the corruption and the vipers and the filth, that was on Wall Street for, has, obviously always been there. And so, here we are, and then Barack Obama comes in, and I vote for that long-legged Mac Daddy, and then halfway through that, I'm voting for Gary Johnson, and last time we heard from him, he's like, duh, like being all authoritarian, and far from libertarian. And then here we are now, man, where like back in 2009, I thought that was what was happening now was going to happen then. But Here we are in 2020, and we heard back in 2010 where Gates was like, this is going to be a year of vaccines. This is going to, 10 years of vaccines. I'm going to give $10 billion to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what's this prick up to? Well, here we are.
Well, he got to do it in Africa and other places before he brought it here.
That's true.
Is what he did.
Well, and then now he's got people out there paying people to whitewash the internet of all of his crimes in India, all of his crimes in Africa. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing statistics now of like 80% of Americans are saying, I'm not taking that vaccine. So it's very possible, very, very possible, unlikely, but very possible that they don't even come up with anything, that they don't even come up with any kind of vaccine.
Well, not every disease.
They give everybody a saline solution, but we should get back to like what
right. So swinging back
here is what the purpose for us to have this conversation tonight.
No, definitely. But one real quick thing, just to throw this in the mix, is that even if you accept the concept of vaccination, there are people pushing back. But I urge you to look at the very same parallel you just laid out, Shali. Mm-hmm. The country was not thrilled with George W. Bush, but once you give them a galvanizing sort of propaganda point like the war on terror, mm-hmm. all of a sudden it was like criminal to even criticize the guy. So what you do is you unify the public through fear, and the parallel works perfectly. Even though people are saying, I don't know if I'll take it, I do know that the majority of the time that's lip service. And I think a lot of people are going to flip right over and go, oh, yes, save your vaccine guy. Help me not to die from the imaginary thing, unless we get some sort of traction with what's going on with this lawsuit that Greg is talking about. Things like this need to happen. Otherwise, that 80% pushing back or whatever number people want to ascribe to it, I think will evaporate quickly.
Well, to put a cap on what I was saying there in that 5-minute rant, if you didn't believe in authoritarian government, that's what you got right now.
Oh, yeah.
If you didn't believe that this is possible,
most people see it. They're basically, people are living in a state of fear.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to do, what people have to understand, the message I'm trying to bring about it, it's we can start to lay our fears to the side a little bit. Help is on the way. There's hope here. And it's coming from doctors around the world. For example, they don't have the civil litigation system in Europe like we have here. But in Belgium, doctors banded together, hundreds of doctors, in fact, thousands of health professionals, banded together to write a letter to the government there and to all of Belgian media, claiming that enough is enough. You can read this letter on the American Institute for Economic Research's website. That's the AIER.org website. It's called Open Letter from Medical Doctors and Health Professionals to All Belgian Authorities and All Belgian Media. And the doctors lay this out in a concise, rational way, exactly where the government and the media is getting it all wrong. Okay, for everything from the vaccine question, which, by the way, only 3 vaccines have ever been more than 50% effective since vaccines were developed. And it's laid out in this article, by the way. So I urge everybody to read it. The website is AIER.org. And the name of the article, as I stated, was Open Letter from Medical Doctors and Health Professionals to All Belgian Authorities and All Belgian Media. It's a very important article to read. The Belgian doctors are getting together. The doctors in Germany are getting together, as well as in Great Britain. And they're all looking towards the United States because they don't have the civil litigation system. We do. And it's the last people that can save the world.
Sorry, Shali, do you have a link to the what he just described there? Maybe we could add it into the chat room, and I'll include it with the show notes, along with any other links that Greg would like to share. I'd like to make sure we have them.
What was the website again?
Go look at
www.what? A
link. Well, it's a long link. If I can get it to you, I'm trying to do it on Skype, but I can't seem to send a message to you. I could send you a link to the article, and it won't open up. Oh, that's because I'm on my phone with this, not on my computer, so it's locking me out. All right. If they go to AIER.org and go into a search bar and probably just write Open Letter from Medical Doctors.
Right.
That'll probably take them to the article.
Oh, yeah. Jeffrey Jackson was talking about that exact article today on the Highwire. If you go to the highwire.com,
yes,
that's Del
very
Bigtree.
important. Because you got to understand something here. We are not going to reach the average Joe six-pack guy out there or soccer mom coming at them with, they're lying, it's a corrupt government and all of that. They're just looking at, hey, I was living what I thought was a decent life that I don't want to lose. And I'm not seeing any credibility. I'm not seeing rational people with rational arguments, particularly from the people that rational arguments should be coming from, the doctors. What they're being paraded with on the television screens and other media are the doctors that are working for the hospital corporations, the corporate hospitals that are under contract under non-disclosure and non-circumvent agreements. They're not allowed to talk about it. Otherwise, they could lose their license.
Right.
So they're private practitioners, and they're good ones. Look, there are bad private practitioners, but there are far more bad doctors in corporate medicine than there are in private practice. All right?
Right.
And the private practitioners have seen their business, their practice. The number of patients they're seeing is down by half. And they're seeing numerous cancellations, and they're getting tired of it. They're saying, "Wait a minute, I can't stay in business. I have to meet a very expensive payroll. Many of them have large staffs, multiple locations, Most of them are doing the best they can to provide the best medical service, whether that's dental, chiropractic, veterinarian, ophthalmology, all elective and non-elective services. And these doctors need to come together, all right, in a voice that will be heard. And when people find out that the doctors, like the doctors in Belgium that wrote this letter, all right, that's going to resonate with the common person to say, maybe I did derive my opinion through propaganda, emotionalism, and fear.
And Greg, we spoke when we were talking about this. I think it might have been, I don't know, within the last couple of weeks, as you shared this information with me. We spoke about Obamacare and how that laid plans a path towards controlling doctors more, so that we're seeing the effect of that. Right? We're seeing the effect of that in the control of the information as a result of what Obamacare did.
It gave more power to the insurance companies to dictate how the doctors could and couldn't run their business. For instance, an insurance company, if you wanted to go get an MRI, say you had a bad shoulder from a car accident, old sports injury, and you just wanted to see, you couldn't go to an MRI center and say, can you please take an MRI? I'll pay for the MRI. I just want to know. I'll take it to my doctor, and he can read it for me, But I got this pain, and I'm going to go ahead and to do this. They'll go, no. According to the law now, under the Obamacare, I can't do that for you unless you have a referral. So now you got to go to a doctor. You got to pay a doctor $150 for a consultation and visit, so he can write you a prescription to go get an MRI. And if you want to get 2 or 3 opinions, you got to pay for consultations for all these doctors. Right? And so they have purposely driven the price of healthcare up. That's just one aspect. There's so much crime and collusion that's taken place, being driven through the hospital corporations, corporate medicine, and the insurance industry. And to make everybody fall into this system, they want people into the Obamacare system because they'll monetize it. They'll just issue a bond against it and monetize it. And then if you don't pay your medical bills, you're going to wind up in jail, just like men who don't pay their child support end up in jail. Because now they could say it's not debtor's prison. You disobeyed a court order.
Right.
Yep. So, one interesting aspect of Obamacare, though, that it was expansive, and I have a curiosity about it in my mind, is the telemedicine idea, the fact that you can meet with doctors via Skype and stuff now.
I talk with doctors about that all the time, and quite frankly, that is the biggest form of quackery, in medicine. There is no way a doctor can make any kind of proper diagnosis without you being in front of them.
Well, see, that's the other thing is that, a lot of doctors have shut down operations. And I recently had a visual problem. Now I require a specialist to examine me, and those were already limited. Now it's impossible. I cannot find a specialist, and nor could I afford the specialist anyway. But I can't find them, and even if I can, I've got to go through this whole extra process of getting a doctor's appointment where you can't wait in a doctor's office like you used to. None of that is possible because of social distancing. My visual problem is such that I don't drive, so I can't wait outside in my car to be called. Okay. And all this, there's a lot of complications here that have been added to the whole thing. There are people that were on medications, and look, I'm not a fan of medications, but some people do require them in order to live. Okay. I do believe that is sometimes ethically applied. But either way, a whole problem was thrown into the healthcare industry here that has not been dealt with. And one wonders, listen, if you don't comply, how are you going to operate? So, there's that whole issue, and you're right about the quackery of being able to see people over Skype. I wondered about this because it's how is it that you make an observation? Yes, you ask questions, but look, I used to watch the TV show House. People lie. You know what I'm saying? That's another issue. But yeah, the whole thing is a gigantic mess. Oh, and by the way, nobody's giving us any sort of like, well, we're going to reform and fix this. Lots of promises on that, but nobody's got an idea of how to do it. And all Obamacare did essentially was make things more complex. I mean, it's nice that pre-existing conditions are not supposed to be an issue anymore, but other than that,
good selling
you got a lot of.
Sorry. No, I'll give you an example. Even today, there was a big healthcare executive order signed by Trump today, which is supposed to address the issue of doctors being, surprise billing from doctors that are out of the network. So you go to a hospital, the emergency room, the hospitals have sold the emergency rooms to equity funds.
Yeah.
So the doctors in there may not be, you might be in one of the big insurance company like an Aetna, okay, or one of the other big ones, and the hospital is a member, but not the emergency room, or not the ambulatory service, or not the anesthesiologist.
Yeah,
it's all
subdivided.
Right, it's all subdivided. So you wind up getting all these surprise bills that are not covered by your healthcare plan, and now you're dealing with tens of thousands of dollars in overcharges and fees. Okay, somebody walks in and picks up a chart, and they charge you $2,000 for it. Okay, it's just people are like, huh? So here's an example of a Trumpism. Trump signs an executive order today, or he gets announced. I'm not sure if he actually signed it today, but I think he did.
Okay.
Where it turns out that it's an absolutely awful executive order because it means that the hospitals can't do the surprise billing. So now they all have to go through a single-fide insurance, and the insurance can charge VIGs. This is going to drive the cost of healthcare even further.
Yeah, right.
So it's exactly what the insurance companies wanted, and it gives him this thing that he can run on and saying, I addressed the issue, and I signed an executive order, and there won't be any more surprise billing. Well, the problem is the cost of healthcare is going to go up by 50% because of it.
It's like that's
the solution.
Yeah. It's like that First Step Act for the prisons, where we're gonna do all these things, and then he defunds the program that would actually run it. So effectively, what you got is garbage written on paper as your executive order is what it comes to.
Another example, like this is where it fools a lot of people, where he goes, "Well, I'm going to defund the World Health Organization." All right, so he pulls the $250 million a year that the World Health Organization is getting, and says, "Oh, why don't we fund Gavi?" Okay, the companies that are owned by Gates and Fauci and all these guys with Moderna and all this stuff. We'll just give them. I tell you what, we'll give Gavi $1.7 billion. Gavi turns around and gives the World Health Organization $500 million.
There you go.
So they've actually got double payment.
They doubled their revenue from the government,
right,
and everybody's out there saying Trump cut funding to the world. No, he didn't. He doubled their revenue.
Right.
He doubled their money the U.S. gives them.
Well,
this is the kind of president this guy is. I mean, love him, hate him, or whatever, but we have to be honest about who he is. He does not have our interest in mind, the common people. He's not of us. He's there to proclamate this system. He's there to oversee the destruction of the United States. The United States is bankrupt, and he's there for the bankruptcy, reorganization, or the foreclosure. Some people are calling it a foreclosure. I'm not quite sure.
Could be.
But the assets are being divvied up, and he's there to oversee it.
Right. And those assets are not going to the people. See, there's another thing about Fauci, since you bring him up again, is I find it remarkable that people are not questioning the fact that the guy who runs, the vaccine industry pretty much as far as the figurehead doctor goes, is not maybe, hedging some of his bets when it comes to putting out a gigantic, money-grabbing scheme here by a couple of big pharmaceutical companies that is going to be this vaccine, especially if it's mandated and so fear-based. I don't even think it's going to need a major advertising campaign to get people to start sticking themselves with it. I really don't.
Hold on, hold on. This is Tony Fauci. I want to say that you're out of line, Chuck Ochelli. You're so out of line.
Well, I'm not Senator Rand, but, look, I'm trying. Anyway, what am I supposed to do? I'm sorry, Greg. I had to throw that in, though, because that's part of the equation here. And I want to get back to this lawsuit because, again, this is the thing that could start to turn things around here. The rest of the world, look, I don't know what to say about the fact that, literally 1/3 of the world was basically put on lockdown immediately over this to begin with, when they didn't have complete data. They didn't have, ethical reproduced data where, say, I'll gather the data, you'll gather the data, let's see if we come up with the same numbers. They didn't have comparative studies. They didn't have control groups. They didn't even have proper identification of exactly what this virus is, okay? And locked down 1/3 of the world. I don't know what to say about the world, but I'll tell you that the little population, because we are small compared to the rest of the world by the numbers, here in the United States got hit brutally financially from this entire circumstance. And if it was done, again, out of an abundance of caution, because of ignorance and because there was serious ideas here that it would have been far worse to endure a plague, basically, then okay, I get it. But here's the problem. Nobody's presented the data to support that yet. Okay? And
Right.
As much as I'm not denying the disease exists, I'm not denying that people haven't died from it. Absolutely not. I question the numbers. I question the process. I question the, science in air quotes that has been presented in the media so far. And yet, believe me, I've gotten more email about this than anything else, that I'm an awful, horrible human being for even questioning this. And I'm left to wonder why people haven't questioned this a hell of a lot more, Greg. But anyway, please, if there's anything else you want to tell us about this lawsuit, I want to hear more about it. And also, we need to find a way to not just surrender that we're not going to get into people's ears. You'd be amazed at how far a podcast can go, people working at it on social media, friends tell friends. You'd be amazed sometimes how things do happen to get out there if we let the information be available to them. Uphill battle for sure. But I'm willing to try with what I got. So let's continue.
Well, great, because it's really important. We need to reach every private practitioner in the United States. And there's over 3 million of them. And so we need help in this. We are starting, we just posted up a GoFundMe this week. Okay? So we're asking people whatever they can contribute to our thing, and they can find that on my website at livewellaps.com/plaintiff. And there's articles on there, and soon I'm going to be doing an interview. I'm going to be doing a Skype interview with Tom Rentz. Hopefully soon, maybe as early as tomorrow, I hope. He's a bit busy, so we're going to have that up there as soon as he can squeeze the time in for our interview. He has done a lot of interviews. He did a great interview with John Rappaport, amongst other people in the past week. So he's getting calls from people all around the world, actually, to start. So people can go and look, probably just into YouTube now, and just put Tom Rentz in, RENZ, and his interviews will start showing up. Okay.
Well, I'd love
he
it.
He can explain the legal side of it, but I'm not a lawyer. He is, so he explains the legal side of this a lot better.
Yeah, no, I understand. That's why I'm not asking direct, exact, specific legal questions. I'm trying to give a general concept about what's being done here, since you're involved with it. By the way, if you could put in a good word for me with Mr. Rentz, I would be more than happy to just turn over a portion of one of my programs for him to make a statement if he wants, or whatever. Let's bring it on. And I'd love to hear exactly legally what this means. And obviously he can just speak from those parameters. He's not a doctor, but he could speak to the legal procedure here, what this actually could do, what the intent is, and maybe give us some more specifics about the process, because I would love to hear about that.
Well, I think right. I think he explained in that one in the video with Rappaport that he could even get Fauci on the stand. to be able to cross-examine him, and with all this information, and apparently, like Greg said, and like Ren said, he's got a team of guys that are smarter than they need to be. So that's what we need at this time. We need,
and more are joining. There are going to be more medical experts from around the world that are more than willing to do what they can. I'm working with another lawyer out of Germany, Rainer Follner. We're reaching out to Rocco Galati in Canada, who is suing, what's his face, the prime minister up there, forget it, the guy Trudeau, along with other people in their government. I've reached out to a lawyer in California who is filing a lawsuit against Gary Newsom, and working with other lawyers in Texas for the case that will be filed against Greg Abbott, as well as additional cases there. The key to all this, everybody's case is important. Everybody needs to be heard in this. Everybody who's been hurt and has been damaged, everybody needs to have their day in court on this. No question about it. But for right now, to shut this things down, my personal belief, and Tom agrees with me, when the doctors come together, like the doctors in Europe that have formed to write that open letter to their government and the media, please stop with the false data, and to put the doctors attempt to put out the real facts about vaccines, the real facts about the studies that they've seen, the contagion of this COVID virus, because they're derelict in their duty in giving people the actual accurate information. Every attorney general, state attorneys general in this country is guilty of dereliction of duty by not pursuing these people within their states that are looking to profit or that are currently profiting from this false data. William Barr needs to either get off his butt, right, and get going, because he himself can take down Bill Gates and Fauci, because they are personally going to benefit from this through their interest in the vaccine companies. That's not deniable.
Yeah.
If he was doing that in an attempt to sell stock, he could be arrested for a dozen securities violations and be sentenced to more than 50 years in jail. Now,
yes.
Look,
Bill Barr is more of a protector of the system, and certainly at this point, Trump's protector. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, there's no other explanation for a whole bunch of people by the Justice Department. So I don't know if that's going to be the guy to turn to. I think he might have to be a defendant here, not somebody who's going to fix it.
Everybody that listens to this program, share this with other people they know. All right? Help support organizations like ours. Help support Tom Rentz and his organization in Ohio.
Right, OhioStandsUp.org. OhioStandsUp.org.
Okay? Write letters. Don't call. Write letters to your state attorney general demanding that they do their jobs. Otherwise, say you are
derelict of duty.
This is a dereliction of duty for you to ignore this. These people are openly committing fraud. Everybody from Walmart to Home Depot, you name it, they're all involved in this.
Right.
They've received billions of dollars. Many of these big the hospital corporations, the money that they are being paid to put people on respirators.
To go along with it.
To go along with it. All of this is based on faulty data. They are guilty of data fraud. Every single one of them. All of these hospital administrators that are benefiting from this, they could all go to prison.
And how many of these nurses that were involved in the things that went on in New York City and in all these other different hospitals
you start
where people
going
were
after
dying?
The nurses first.
Yeah.
You start going after the nurses first, because the nurses are locked in with non-disclosure agreements. Okay, there have been many nurses, many nurse practitioners and physician assistants who quit because when they saw what was going on in the hospitals, not just the TikTok videos, they actually saw what was going on. They saw people being tubulated, and the chances of surviving a tubulation are 1 in 10, less than 1 in 10.
And what is that tubulation? Is that just being trached or something?
Being trached to be hooked up to the respirator. They have to stick a tube down your throat into your lungs, your gag reflexes. So in order for that they have to practically wrap you up like a mummy and inject you with all sorts of sedative drugs.
Mm-hmm. No, they have to sedate you, otherwise your gag reflex is constantly being triggered. And it was a curious thing. I saw a neighbor of mine go into the hospital, and my own observations, I would say that the man had a stroke. He's a Vietnam vet, been around a while, was wounded in action, all that kind of stuff. And quite frankly, I think he had a stroke. And the next thing that we heard from the hospital that his brother got is, well, he's on a respirator, and and they tested him 3 times for COVID-19. That wasn't the issue he was brought into the hospital for. By the way, funny thing, he came up negative every time, but still they insisted on putting him on this respirator, in which case he had to be drugged. Mm-hmm. And his brother, who was also, elderly as well, also a veteran, unable to visit him and everything else, couldn't speak to his brother on a phone. Quite frankly, I thought the man was not going to come out of that hospital alive. And it would not be atypical for the stories that I've heard just in my local area, okay? Thankfully, he did come back. But they had him on a respirator for like 2 weeks.
I can relate a personal story. I have a friend here where I live. Is a gentleman. He was in his 70s, had a bad knee, and went into the hospital for a knee replacement. While he was there, he was tested, and they said he came up positive for COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So his children, who were up in Minnesota, flew down here to visit him. Of course, they weren't able to see him. And the next thing they knew, that the hospital told them that he had was put on a respirator and he had succumbed and died. Mm. So, my feeling about that was, wait a minute, it sounds to me like he was murdered. They made more money on him being a COVID patient and being put on a respirator and dying than they ever would have made on doing a knee replacement for him.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, in the last 16 minutes here, Greg, could you explain that to people? Because I don't fully understand this payment schedule that a couple other people have tried to explain. And I think it would be useful to understand that, at all times, everything can be monetized. Mm-hmm. But why is it that a COVID death is more advantageous financially to a hospital than, say, look, the man's heart just stopped, blood clot, whatever? Why is that?
Because still, most medical procedures that are done in a hospital, unless it's open heart surgery, mm-hmm. most medical procedures still cost less than $35,000. Mm-hmm. A top-end hospital might charge $50,000 for, let's say for an organ transplant, like a kidney organ transplant surgery or something like that. Those are the top hospitals. Mm-hmm. Most of them are still in that $25,000 to $40,000 range on average. Well, what they did with the stimulus plan, the emergency stimulus plan, was to monetize, I don't know, $1.5 trillion for the hospitals around the country. All right. And they knowing that the hospitals were going to take a hit, because when they close off everything and shut the system down, the patients aren't going to be coming in. So what are the hospitals going to do? You pay them off by feeding them a steady stream of supposed victims. And then you give them, on every positive COVID test, they got, $13,000?
Right. Yep.
And then if they hook them up to a respirator, $39,000.
Mm. So
in the hospitals,
financial incentive.
The financial incentive is there. You make more money so through COVID than you do for all these others. And if people are scheduled, particularly if they're elderly, like Stan was. Right. Stan was 78 years old.
Right. And they knew by telling everybody to stay home, especially in that 2 to 4 week period, that the hospitals were not going to be overwhelmed, but they didn't want people to like willy-nilly just be driving around and saying, I think I got COVID, and then go to the hospital and be like, there's nobody here, you know? I mean, it was all just that, their ability to get everybody to be afraid. And like, I was even hearing stories like what we were seeing over in Wuhan, where the people were just falling down the street. They were saying that was theatrics. So, I mean, considering this was a global financial heist, and Wuhan being, and China being obviously in on it and benefiting financially, like Greg said to me, he said, there's a deficit of dollars all over the globe. What happened 4 to 6 weeks in, after all the money, the CARES Act, all the stimulus, I saw a bunch of articles that said all those, basically paraphrasing, all those empty coffers are now filled with U.S. dollars. So the globe was just
it's such a temporary thing, because those dollars are just going to go to service their debts.
Right.
Okay?
So they're going to just give it back.
They're going to run out of those dollars very quickly, and it's the whole thing. This is why they're not opening things back up again. It doesn't have anything to do with a pandemic. Right? The pandemic is just the excuse.
That's true.
They needed to. The world economy was about to blow up anyway.
Right.
But it's their economy, not for us. All we need to do is to just think locally, right? Instead of spending our dollars in big corporate concerns, in corporations that don't keep the money within the community. Instead, that money goes to another state or another country or offshore headquarters, and it doesn't circulate within the community. All right? So if we start to patronize local business people, we can come up with anything. We can go back to money sticks. All right? The necessity is the mother of invention. They always try to fear us and scare us into a collapse. There have been 7 Great Depressions since the United States began. We always hear about the worst one in the 1930s, because that's the one that was engineered and directed by the central bank.
Right.
Actually, the European concerns, it was actually directed from the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Okay? And so that's their perception that they have reinforced through their movies and everything else, that if the economy collapses, it's going to be bad. You know how in every subsequent economic collapse, and there were some pretty severe ones, the 1870s, okay, 1905, 1907, there was a major collapse. Yeah. All right, how long did those things last? 3 months. And most of the time when businesses were shut down, they were quickly reorganized, sold off. The values of them, the assets were sold off, and new businesses sprung up around them, very, very quickly. All right, but the oligarchs, these people this billionaire class of people, they don't want competition. They want everybody working for them. So, I mean, the first things first is we shouldn't be thinking in terms of I just want things to go back to normal. Normal was bad. We do have an opportunity to fix things and improve upon them. We have to do it our way, not theirs. Because it's not going to be good for us. Their way is, we've all heard, there's no need for this many, what they believe, this many people on the planet. There'd be no way to feed them all. So what are they going to do with us? Right?
No, I understand, but we're coming out of a hole here that is unique to some of those other financial collapses.
Well, the saying, never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. I totally understand that. But here's an interesting thing that I think, because I would love to just go with the operational. And if you had said this to me, a year ago, 2 years ago, yes, think locally, work locally. But again, my observations, I'm here in the Southeast now. Used to live in the Northeast, and it might be healthier up there than it is down here. But quite frankly, what this has done, this COVID shutdown, and even not in the extreme form that it was in the Northeast, in the state of Georgia, pretty much it's crushed most of the local businesses. They can't operate. The only people that absorb this are the franchises and the corporate entities that have outposts here. So now your choices of local anything, such as they existed previous, are gone.
That's why every local business has to join with every other local business within their states and in their communities and go after and sue the Walmarts and sue the Home Depots and sue their county executives and their mayors and their state senators and Congress people. All right? All of these people are guilty. And if we cannot account, if we can't count on the judicial system to do its job and pursue this blatant criminality, then the only recourse we have left is the civil actions. And it's the one thing that they haven't patched. Because unlike other things, remember, the legal system is also a legal society. And they take a pledge to their brethren, to the legal system itself, to do no harm to each other or the system, the legal system, as it stands. And the civil litigation system in the United States has been roaring for many years. In some cases, it's done really good, and in other cases, it hasn't.
Can you explain?
We've all heard of.
Can you explain why they don't have it in Europe? I mean, in Europe, you said they don't have it. They don't have the ability for that.
They don't have. No. In the United States, if you spilled a hot cup of coffee on your lap from McDonald's, you could sue McDonald's. You couldn't do that in Europe.
Okay.
All right? And for years, they've been trying to, it was a campaign issue going all the way back to the 90s, the famous McDonald's $10 million lawsuit. Okay, somebody going through a drive-thru and spilling coffee on their lap, right? So once the politicos get a sniff of all this and start to realize that they're in a corner, that until they can shut this down, they've either got to do something like they did with the pharmaceutical industry and give them legal protections, all right, for themselves, or face the consequences of all this. They're probably going to start talking about tort reform, probably in the very near future. Don't be surprised.
Yeah, well, see, here's the thing. Like, I have a Swedish economist on occasion who corrected me when I said that there's no sort of way to reconcile that over there, the way that we would here. But at the same time, Greg, I hate to say this to you, but I don't feel super enthusiastic about relying on the system itself without a whole lot of action. Because
neither do I. That's why I say this isn't about the system functioning. The system is broken.
Right.
And even the case was approved to go to discovery. And it gets to the next level to actually be tried and heard. That's a totally different story. Okay? Right. But one step at a time. What we're trying to do with this is we're trying to first corral the doctors and get the doctors to unify their voice together so they can stand up, because what that does in the minds of people is they say, okay, the doctors are standing up. You know what? Probably what the government might be saying is wrong.
Right. So once again, last 5 minutes here or so, I want to just sort of allow both of you. I mean, Shali, you can't go on a 5-minute rant here because that's all there is.
Oh, no, I'm good.
But if you could give me a capper on this with Greg, that would be great, because I think that this needs to be heard. Greg, give your website one more time so people can go there, because I know you gave that in the midst of some other stuff and it might have gotten lost. So what is your website address again?
The website is livewellaps.com/plaintiff.
Right, and that link is in the chat room at Ochelli.com in case you guys want to roll it back. If you're listening to it later, I'll include it with the show notes.
I just tweeted.
Please look for LiveWell APS. I also have 3 different channels, one geared towards patients, which is called Get Out From Under. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Okay? Another one is for private practitioners, private practitioner success, and LiveWell APS. But LiveWell APS is where we're driving a fundraising efforts to reach all the doctors and to help Tom and other lawyers that are bringing these cases, because it's a huge financial burden on them as well. So anybody can help through our GoFundMe, by making a donation on our GoFundMe page is much appreciated. And just basically spread the word. And like I said earlier, the whole point of this is that one thing that could wake up that rationality of thought. It's introducing a little rationality into the debate. Just the question, what if the doctor stood up and said, no more, enough is enough? People can show other people they know, refer them to the article we talked about with the doctors in Belgium. We have at least something that could create a financial penalty for these people that will remove any benefit that they're getting from their treasonous behavior. And that in itself could cause this thing to come to a screeching halt. And if we can get people just to be a little proactive and write a letter demanding that their attorney general pursue these people who are guilty of promoting false data, and to stop in their dereliction of duty and get to it. If people start writing and this happens on a mass scale, it won't be ignored anymore. They're going to have to do something.
Amen.
So, Shali, how shall we close this out?
Well, I was, super stoked to hear that this was going on, and with Greg, doing what he does, and that correlation to that can help in this lawsuit with Tom, and so this is like Greg said, this is our last. This is our last, could be our last chance to try to do something to get this draconian bullshit to end.
I would say it's the last, but let's say it's the last step before things go postal.
Right.
If it fails, there's no other option, but it's got to go postal.
Exactly.
There you have it. Hopefully, Shali, you'll be able to give me the GoFundMe link so we can provide that in the show notes also. And Live Well APS is Greg's website. That is the first step. He also mentioned other websites to go to get information about all of these things going on. I would suggest you check